Hello everyone, my name is John Bullock and I'd like to welcome you to this podcast from The Light Review. Every now and again, something comes across your desk, appears in your inbox and you go, I wasn't expecting to see that. And when that happens sometimes 3 times, you think maybe there's something here that we need to go out and share. And something like that is going on for us at the moment. Here at The Light Review, we've been having a discussion about decorative lighting, the role of decorative lighting in lighting design, and you may have seen the podcast that we've done on that. My take on that is that we don't ask enough of the manufacturers who design and put decorative lighting out there. There's no technical data that goes with it. There's no photometrics. How can we integrate it into a proper lighting scheme when we ought to be integrating it into proper lighting schemes? So there's a take on what decorative lighting ought to be doing for us. And then out of the Society of Light and Lighting in the latest issue, there we go, that's the thing, we've got a manifesto, the Ambient Lighting Manifesto, from our good friends Kevin Kelly, Kit Cuttle, Peter Boyce, Peter Raynham, the A-Team. When these guys speak, we ought to be listening. And what are they talking about? Well, they're saying that we need to get away from the way that we've traditionally been calculating luminance plots and things like that. Our approach to lighting is wrong. And that's a hell of a thing to say at this stage of the game, when an awful lot of us have spent a lifetime doing this sort of stuff. But what they're talking about, strangely enough, is that if we shift away from, if you like, the idea that light is projected out of a light fitting down into a space, and more particularly to create task illuminances, but what we should always be talking about is light in space, in the round, then guess what? If we're not going to be using modular fixtures, downlights to do that, we need to find something else to do it. Decorative lighting maybe, or whatever we call to choose, decorative lighting. So with all of that going on, it occurred to me that something that I've been banging on about for the last few years may be time just to stick it out there again and see what happens. So what this podcast is about is designing without downlights. Oh no, John's talking about designing without downlights again. So I've put that talk, which some of you may have witnessed, experienced, sat through in tears of laughter. And here's a chance to see it again. So I hope you enjoy it. This is me talking about designing without downlighting. Thank you very much. Welcome to Designing Without Downlights, something that I've been talking about for a few years now. It seems I've been doing this since 2014, looking at the records. It's still as relevant now as it ever was. And there's even more things happening. This is the interesting thing, that if we don't design with downlights, then what do we design with? And if we see pressure coming into the industry to perhaps look at different ways of approaching practical illumination levels as to what we should be achieving and how we should be achieving it, then we have to move away from the very, very simple idea of being able to know what light we're dropping down onto horizontal surfaces. And that's the only thing, of course, that a downlighter is for, just dropping lights onto a horizontal surface. So let's sort of open up our minds a little bit and think about what it might mean to design without downlights. Now, for me, the scariest part of any new project is the initial meeting with a client, when you get a brief and the client is telling you what it is that they want from their wonderful new project. And then they look at you and they go, what do you think? And if we are honest with ourselves, then the answer should be, I'll tell you what, I've absolutely no idea, because you've only just told me. I now need to go away and think about that, maybe just for a couple of minutes, but I do not have a stock answer. And the problem we have, of course, is that when we are looking at the world as we currently see it, there is a stock answer. And that stock answer is the dreaded grid of downlighters that is in the ceiling. That is the be-all and end-all for some people. And unfortunately, those people have the lion's share of determining what is going into the ceilings of domestic and commercial projects. This is something that's been going on for me for quite a little while, and I can actually pinpoint the time when it really sort of stood out, in that architects came to me and said, we're interested in what you do. We've got this project. It's a Voisey house in the south of Dorset, and we're in for a complete refurbishment, but we don't know how to deal with the downlights. And I said to them, I don't understand why you want to put downlights into a Voisey arts and crafts house. How can that work? And that statement won me the job. And I thought, oh, their assumption was, there we are, the grid was in their heads already. And by saying to them, we don't need the grid, gave them a new way of thinking. A couple of years later, I'm on site with a client. The builder sort of bowls up, all sort of full of the joys of spring, and says, do you want to come and see where we've put the downlighters in the bathroom? And I looked at him, and I looked at the client, and I said, but there aren't any downlighters in the bathroom. Oh, we always put downlights in bathrooms. Not on my projects, you don't. But there's a builder deciding inside his head there was a grid of downlights. And maybe one of the, if you like, one of the most sort of disheartening experiences came around once we got the idea of what LEDs were doing, and they were making serious inroads into the commercial specification sector. I was asked to speak at a conference of LED manufacturers, and the question I was answering was, what is it that lighting designers are looking for from the LED? And I said, basically, we don't yet know what an LED is for. It's different to anything we've seen before. What is its form? What is its shape? What are the wonderful things about it that we need to explore? And they said, no, we're just talking about downlights. These were not lighting people. These were people who'd looked at the lighting market and had determined that there was only downlighters to worry about. So what they needed to do was to design downlights. And then what they're actually asking me is, what should the LED downlight look like? Oh, there we go. So that's really where we come from, and the position that we're in even today. So here's a question: what is a downlight? We talk about this thing as if everybody is on the same hymn sheet, and we're not. We're not. Some people look at things and say that's a downlight, that's not a downlight. Let me give you my view of what is and what isn't a downlight. All of these things are recess fittings. But if we say, well, a recess fitting is a downlight and a downlight is a recess fitting, sounds a bit Greek to me, but it's also not true, because in my head, these are downlights. These are essentially recessed torches. They point at the ground. They create a beam of light. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, job is done. On the other hand, these, although they're recessed, are not strictly speaking downlights. They do more than just throw that beam of light onto the ground. You know, the one in the bottom left there, yeah, that has got a beam of light that hits the ground, but he's also got that skirt that will throw its light out horizontally. That's not, to me, a pure downlight. A fitting that's got a diffusing screen on it, that's not a downlight. And something that is a piece of crystal that looks for all the world like, I don't know what it looks like. Something that you might, it's the beginning of a horror movie, maybe. That's not a downlight, because that's just a sparkly crystal gonad in my head, and it might be in my head, but it's not on any of my projects. Lovely fitting though it is for those who go that way. Some manufacturers have always been very good at that. They tell us how poor the interior is going to look if you actually light their space with downlights. That's great, because we can actually look at that and go, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, thanks very much. When's the next bus? I'm out of here, because that's not what we want. Bit of history for you. I am of an age where I remember the world before there were downlights at all. In fact, I'm of an age where, yeah, the ascent of the downlight is on my doorstep in a way, because I was part of that army of enthusiasts. But let's get back. Let's get back to the pre downlight days, when dinosaurs walked the earth, or Walsall in 1975, as we might like to call it, because this is where I was stomping around. And here's a young electrical engineer sitting there at his desk, and what is that man reading? I tell you what he might be reading. He might be reading the Thorn catalogue, because in the Thorn catalogue, these were the downlights that were available in 1975, all over the country, not just in Walsall, I may add. I've been given the job of putting some new lighting into Rushall Working Men's Club, which was just a couple of miles up the road. And this was pretty important, because I think this was probably my first piece of commercial lighting design. I was working for the contracts department, so I was actually going to be in charge of getting the damn things fitted. But nevertheless, it was me, my imagination, and the Thorn catalogue to see what we might come up with. Sources at the time were pretty straightforward, simple: tungsten filament, PAR lamps, PAR 38s, PAR 56s, blown glass reflectors, linear halogens, the GLS lamp. Hold that thought with the GLS lamps for a minute, because a few years later, just about 5 years down the track, something very important happened. And a German company opened up a showroom in Mayfair. They produced the best catalogue that we'd ever seen. I'm sorry, anybody else who thinks they were doing something better, you're wrong, because the Urco catalogue was head, shoulders, waist and kneecaps above everybody else. And they were working with the GLS lamp, but they were working with the GLS lamp in a very particular kind of housing. The low brightness, dark light reflector, something which we had really not got any sense of before. We hadn't quite come to grips with what that was doing. It's the kind of technology that needs a champion, and that champion was Norman Foster. Hey, if you're going to have a champion, have somebody like that. And Norman Foster was the patron of Claude Engel, who had a fantastic reputation as a lighting designer out of Washington, DC, I believe. And between them, they produced new lighting interiors, the like of which we had not seen before. And architects loved this, because relatively small circles in the ceiling that aren't bright and glary, that run along with the architecture and produce that kind of architectural form, is what they were all about. This was a time, remember, where spaces were becoming much more minimal. Surface decoration was not exactly frowned upon, but it was, as you can see from that image, there's not an awful lot of it about. So the Urco fixture became the go-to style of downlighting for commercial architectural projects, and most of the major lighting companies were producing a version of that fixture, and still are. I mean, this is an image that's just showing how the polished dark light reflector has evolved. Got a couple of CFL lamps, remember those? And we'll still see that technology used with LEDs today. But really, with all due respect to Urco, it wasn't really the Urco style of downlighting that really caught the imagination. For that, we needed to go to North London to a little independent wholesale business called Discount Cable, who had the agency for a little Italian company called Reggiani. And Reggiani had started to put together a range of small downlights using a new to us lamp, the 12 volt, 50 watt, dichroic reflector, tungsten halogen lamp. And we all went, This is the best thing we have ever seen. This is amazing. This is fantastic. We've got to use this. And we all know what happened next. Everybody jumped onto this bandwagon. One of the benefits for the dichroic lamp and for companies like Reggiani is that you were looking for openings in the ceilings that were, what, 70 mil, 80 mil maybe. Whereas with the Urco style, you might have been looking at 150, 200, 250 mil. Made a very big difference because it meant that when we come to the domestic sector, this is where the tungsten halogen revolution really, really took off. And the company that we should be looking at for that is John Cullen Lighting Design. I worked with John for a very, very short time. And he took Chelsea by the scruff of the neck and he transformed a high-end residential market in that area of London, and it just spread out from there. And of course, a good friend, Sally Story, took over the company when we lost John, sadly. And that idea of high contrast, highlighted interiors that could light bits of an interior, a particular thing, a vase of flowers, a picture on the wall, a chair in the corner, changed everything. And it meant that for a time, we thought we had something that was really worth the effort. Here's a lovely minimalist interior here. And yeah, there are downlighters if you look for them in the ceiling, but they're out of the way and they are in that sloping soffit in order to light that worktop. And you go, oh, that's what downlighters are for, because that's really good and focused highlighting. Great stuff. But then we started to put them into bedrooms, and the kitchen started to lose its focus because we started to see the makings of the grid, and the grid went on and on and on, getting worse, and on and on. The real argument here is not that we're seeing light fittings with a kind of a different decoration, because clearly there's a little bit of product design going into that, but they're all doing the same damn thing. They are all just dropping a regular grid of light down onto the floor and calling it lighting design. And that, my friends, does not cut the mustard. It doesn't matter how elegant the space is. If that's all you've got on the ceiling, you're missing a trick. Seriously missing a trick here. And the way that it's like everything else matters except for the lighting, because we know what the lighting is going to be. And by now we do have the grid hardwired into our thought process. So it doesn't matter if it's a bedroom or a dining room, a hotel bar, they're all interchangeable. Everything can happen. This is my pal's kitchen down the road, and yeah, there we go. There's, you know, tram lines of downlights. What does it do? It lights the room. Does it light the room well? Not particularly. Let's move to a traditional pub just on the other side of Yeovil from where I am here. And yeah, I love the stone chimney breast. I don't quite see what the downlighters have got to do with anything, other than no one ever thought that there was any other way of doing it. So there we are. It's a thing called the monkey trap. And the monkey trap is an idea that comes from, guess what? Trapping monkeys. The idea is that you take a gourd and you make a little hole in the end of the gourd, and then you tie the gourd to a tree, and then you put a piece of fruit into the gourd. The monkey comes along. The monkey knows that there's a piece of fruit in there, puts the hand in, grabs hold of the fruit, makes a fist, and can now no longer withdraw the hand from the gourd. The monkey is trapped. It can only free itself by freeing itself from the idea of the fruit. See where I'm going with this? We are caught in a monkey trap of the downlighter grid. We cannot move on until we get rid of the grid itself. We have to open our fist We have to extract our hand, and we have to run gibbering through the forest, free as birds or monkeys, to a new kind of way of doing things. Because while we've been looking at the grid, we've not been looking at anything else. Here was this was great, because this gave me a chance to actually demonstrate what we could do. There's an architect not far from me, up towards Shaftesbury, does work with local developers, and he showed me a project he was working on, and I said, that really deserves some decent lighting. There's some nice stuff going on there. And he said, well, he said, well, they'll just go with the usual stuff. They won't be interested. So I got him to get me an introduction to the developers. I explained to the developers what I would try and do. And for a peppercorn fee, I said, I'll tell you what, I will do you the lighting design that you are expecting to put in there. Even though you haven't told me what you're expecting to do, I already know what you're going to do. And then I'll do my own design, and I'll cost the two, and mine will be cheaper. And they went, oh, okay, go on. So yeah, I produced the downlighter scheme, quite an attractive downlighter scheme as things go. The grid is not so griddable, because I do have standards, but nevertheless, that was just everything done with downlights. And then I came along and said, but of course you could do it like this. And now what we've got is ceiling mounted fixtures, wall fixtures, decorative fixtures, utility fixtures, all doing the job that they're meant to do. And I put the costings together, and there was a handsome saving. And why was there a handsome saving? It's the thing that everybody forgets about downlights. Everybody looks at the downlight and they go, well, they're cheap. Why should I spend 50 quid on a light fitting when for a tenner I could get a downlight to do that? And you go, well, 10 quid plays 50 quid. Well, what can you do? Well, this is what you can do. In a utility room, and you put in a utility room, and you say, we need 6 downlighters in that room, or 1 ceiling mounted fitting. And this is how the figures work out. The electricians charge by the point. And it's around £60 a point to install a fitting. So your 6 fittings in your utility room have just knocked you back 360 quid. Plus 60 quid for the fitting. So 420 quid buys you your light for your utility room. On the other hand, you could put 1 fitting in the middle of that utility room, spend 50 quid on a fitting, and guess what? You've spent 110 quid, which is a damn sight less money than putting in half a dozen cheap downlights. Everybody looks at the price of the fitting. Nobody looks at the price of the installation. What fools we are. But as I said, if we're not going to use downlighters, we've got to do something else. So what do we do? What's in our head if we haven't got a grid of downlights? Well, if we run looning around the deserted hallways of our imagination, we might find something that we'd never expected to see. Like, for example, there's architecture. There's no architecture in a downlighter grid. There's just a grid of downlights in the ceiling. But if you look at architecture, the lighting and the architecture working together gives you an opportunity to do something different. Sometimes it even looks like it might be a downlighter scheme. But I would refer you to my previous note that a recessed fitting with a diffuser in front of it is not a downlight in my book. So we can do things like this. Lovely architectural form. How about that? Oh, hey, now rectangular fittings, and because we are very clever these days and we know there are people out there doing it, we know that's an artificial sunlight scheme because you can see the brightness on the floor there. Hey, you might say to me, but that's a downlight because that's all the sun does. It just projects its light onto the floor. Well, you've got me there. Sorry, my argument falls at the first hurdle. Rubbish. That's an artificial roof light. And here's a scheme of mine, which I have to admit, I put my hand up, there is an Urco dark light downlight in that picture. You have to find it for yourself because I'm not going to tell you where it is. But here everything is about the architectural form. All of the lighting in the room is about the architecture and, if you like, the interior landscape of the furnishings. The lighting follows that. There is no grid being imposed on this. Sometimes it's obvious. If an architect is going to be generous enough to give you a little sort of pop back to create a doorway at the end of a bridge, hey, light the alcove that's just been created. You don't need to put it anywhere else. And sometimes, you never know, you might be able to stick the light around the corner, because that ends up looking sexy and people like that. We do not need to have a downlighter in that ceiling. Thank you. And if somebody comes along and gives you a 15-meter high shaft into which they're going to install a brand new lift, well, why not install a 15-meter high light fitting? It's a bit of something to think about. I enjoyed doing that one. A bit difficult getting it into the house, into the building, but nevertheless, it's there. And if we've got architectural insertions into, again, an arts and crafts building, and there's a grid to work with those sort of end of beams that you can see there, just stick the lights on the end of the beam. Make it work. Make it work according to what it is, because you will find that there is a harmony and there is a rhythm to be enjoyed in that, which the downlighters would never offer you. And if you really want to be grown up, you can have a downlighter that's the size of a room. Fantastic. So by this time, we've now created, we've got as far as you working with the architecture. The architecture demands light form, so because it becomes an architectural detail. And what might light form mean? This was a conversation I had with a friend of mine, and the new lighting guide on office lighting had come out, and we'd looked through it and said, do you think it's true that we could probably light offices to code and use Chinese paper shades? And the answer was, I think we can, provided we've got the numbers right. This is not a Chinese paper shade. This is a very, very sophisticated pendant fixture, and it's doing a bit of uplighting and a lot of downlighting. But that is a much better way of lighting that space than trying to do it with grids of downlights. And similarly, here's the same architects that I worked with when we did the arts and crafts house. This is their own studio, and the last thing they wanted was anything like a downlighter in this kind of structure. So I gave them glass Chinese shades, if you like, topped up with local desk lighting, a much more attractive interior and a much happier place to work. And if you're stuck with it, why not just get some pickup sticks and just put some linear fixtures up there? That job is probably using T5 fluorescence, I would imagine. I've recently done a job using the LED equivalent of that, a little bit more ordered than the randomness, but nevertheless, it does things that grids of downlighters don't. And here we've got a decorative fitting hanging over a table. Very, very nice. It makes the whole thing very attractive. The thing about this picture is that I felt very sorry for the chair that's down there in the corner with no lighting on it at all. And I thought, oh, that's something that's begging for a downlighter, don't you think? But then you go, well, not necessarily, because Lee Broom has shown us a different way to treat chairs that sit in dark corners of rooms. And if you really want to be traditional about it, get yourself some Paul Henningsen. Nip over to Copenhagen, go and have a look at the Poulsen range. Go and buy an artichoke. Fantastic. I wish I could afford an artichoke. That would be wonderful. I wish I could afford the house that I could put an artichoke into. But anyway, not to worry. You can worry about things like this. These are certainly not downlighters, and they're certainly not in any scheme of mine, because I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at here, but it looks spooky. And sometimes when you're going down this particular track, you find a fixture and you look at it and you go, it's not very interesting, is it? What would make it interesting? How about if you just put lots of them on a wall? That might be interesting. So always saying that might be interesting. It's interesting when you have the conversation with the client, when you say, here's a nice fitting. It's only, what is it? It's about £100, but we do need 10 of them. Thank you very much. And so light form, what lights look like, how they then work inside the architecture, that all works for us. But what about the light itself? Can we make light work for us when we're talking about, you know, the decorative end of things? Well, I do not want this in my bedroom. Thank you very much. I sleep badly enough as it is. I certainly do not need this to wake up to in the middle of the night. But there's something very quietly elegant about light and form and shadow and things like this. Yes, it's an art piece. I get that it's an art piece, but there are smaller versions of that that you could stick into a bedroom, and I think that would work very nicely. Working very big, this is what happens when the BBC comes to Sherborne and tries to do some filming outside the Abbey, and they need some moonlight, and there's no moon, so they hang a great big globe of light over the space, and it looks wonderful. There were people coming out onto the street just to see that. But then again, we're the kind of people who point at airplanes, so no change there then. But the same idea was picked up by Joost Hermans, an architect working for Foster at the time, when he created the light catcher, which is essentially a translucent keel with a light source inside it. But it makes a huge presence in the room, and that presence is not intimidating. It has a lovely softness to it, and it creates a pattern of light which is very, very natural, so we don't feel that we're dodging in and out of light beams. And of course, once you get to that, you can start creating all kinds of, I don't know, upturned jellyfish, whatever they might turn out to be. Light doesn't go around corners, does it? But then again, we can always play with mirrors. All you need to do this is to get all the furniture out of the room, break a mirror onto the floor and throw some light at it. What can possibly go wrong? Or you might have something like this, which is altogether more subtle. One of mine, of course. The reflections in the balustrade in there, and it is deliberate. It's a deliberate optical trick as to what is a real light fitting and what is not a real light fitting, and you can work that out for yourself as well. And we've got LEDs these days, which means that we've got colour these days, which means if you are really obliged to use this, but please use carefully, because once you've seen one rainbow staircase, you've probably seen them all, and sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it ain't. But I enjoy working with limited palette, so blues and aquas and greens, oranges and yellows. The whole sort of spectral, full spectrum business is not obligatory. Let me just say that, just in case you thought it was. Now, it's where does our light come from? What are we trying to do? And who are we doing it for? We've talked about the architecture. You know, we've talked about the shape of the light, what the light is actually doing, what colour the light might be. But at the end of the day, we're lighting for people, and people do come with ideas. So, okay, if that's what your client wants, that's what your client can get. Sometimes it's a little bit more tricky, and we have to grit our teeth and get down to it. But we are not going to get rid of the fact that we have clients, and we have clients who care. Welcome to the future. While we're here, it's always good to sort of have a look and see what is going on in science fiction futures on the telly, because sometimes somebody comes up with an idea or not. This is 10 forward on the USS Enterprise in the 24th century, and we are lighting tabletops. Really? It looks as if we've finally mastered what the OLED might be able to do, but to be perfectly honest, they haven't really yet still got a handle on what decent interior lighting design might look like. We're allowed to do things like this these days, which is great. I love this. I think it's a great, again, it's another one where the price of one of these was very reasonable, and the price of all of them made for a fantastic project. I think it's great. I think it's great. The lighting in there is doing exactly what lighting ought to do in an enclosed space like that, and so much fun has been brought to it that's terrific. And if you're still looking for something to do with a dead cat, yeah, there you go. My favourite fun light fitting, a client of mine wanted to put an illuminated dog in her bathroom. I said she wasn't allowed to do that, and so she said, what about this instead? It is a life-size illuminated moose head. It's out of a company in Norway, or where else, and for a mere, I don't know, 1,500 quid or something. It can be yours, but you saw it here first. Now, just getting a little bit more serious about all of this, we do have some work to do, and I would like to suggest that in moving away from downlights, we have to move towards something else. So this is just a sort of little swatch, if you like, of the art of the possible. White opal glass ceiling lights, just a Google search. White opal glass wall lights, just another Google search. Ceiling lights that have got some fun in them, or not. Depends what you feel like, depends what your client feels like, because that's a conversation to be had. And similarly, funky wall lights. Actually, funky wall lights can be really funky. It's much easier to put in a funky wall light than it is to put in a funky ceiling light. But there's all there, and we can do it. And why can we do it? Because we can. What we need to do is to say to the people who are making these fixtures, the product designers who are working with decorative lighting already, the companies who are putting those ranges out, the people who are distributing it, is that we need more information from them. We've never bothered to get photometric data out of a decorative light fitting, because we do, well, awful lot of us don't care, and B, we're looking at it as if you go, well, it doesn't really matter because the downlighters are actually doing the heavy lifting. All we want is something something fancy to hang off the ceiling. But we need the decorative lighting community to come to us with information, because we need to be able to put them into dialogues, put them into relogs. They need to, even if it's just a blob on a ceiling or a blob on a wall, because none of these things really are projecting light. It is just a source of light in the space. But my friends, it is a source of light in the space that we need to include in our calculations. It is part of the design. It is not just a fancy add-on at the end. And as they said, my friendly architect over Shaftesbury Way, any fool can design a downlight scheme. The problem is we need you to design it properly. And we can't always afford to pay you. So there we go. Sorry about that. But I'll leave you with just one more observation. You can't do this with a downlight. Thanks very much. It's been great to have your attention, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Cheers. Bye.